What's up, everyone? Chris Manning here from the Locked On Cavs podcast, coming to you to bring in part one of a two-part mailbag. Part one is going to answer some very fun Cavs questions, including picking between Darius, Mark Price, and Kyrie Irving, talking about the health of Caris LeVert and more, and then stay tuned for part two tomorrow, which will have more fun topics. So subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform of choice if you have not already. By the way, I want to thank you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. Remember, we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Today's episode is also brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. That's BetOnline. That's where the game starts. What is up, everyone? Chris Manning here. It's mailbag time. We're recording this a bit ahead of time, so if there's some context that has changed and whatnot, we're sorry, but we're getting ahead right now. Evan, let's dive into the questions. Our first question today comes from Frobly or Death on the Discord, who asks, who has the next jersey retired? They write, I'd imagine it's many of like four guys. That doesn't make sense, but okay. From 2016, who do we see it happening to first? I think there's just a very obvious answer to this, and that's LeBron James.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. I think LeBron's the first logical pick, but let's make it a dicey things. I think we're both in agreement. Who gets their jersey retired second?
I think Kevin Love.
I do too. Okay, so we're 2 for 2 so far on being in the same page.
But let's unpack that for a second, because I think the Love thing is partially a product of the fact that he is still around.
Yeah, I think that's true. Especially because all bridges with Kyrie were burned on the way out, and then Kyrie kind of tried to smooth things over a little bit with the fans when Colin cooked the Nets' big three and just led to their collapse. Not his vaccine status, it was Colin Sexton, but I agree. I think it's partially that, but I think Kevin Love also is kind of underrated for how valuable he was with the Cavs, and it didn't really come into perspective, I guess, until this season, because he was dogged on for the better part of that contract extension he signed with Cleveland. He was dogged on for the better part of LeBron's second stint with Cleveland. He was constantly in trade rumors and speculation. Friend of the pod, Alona, is probably just, hearts fluttering right now, and she's banging her fist on her desk in agreement, but Kevin Love, like I think you said, if he didn't have the luxury of longevity on his side, we probably would see a different player wearing 0 at this point for the Cavs, because let's be frank, they reissued 2 to Colin Sexton, and obviously 23 is off limits just because that's a pretty special number in its own right. And yeah, I just think if Love didn't have the luxury of longevity, like you said, plus I think him kind of having this bounce back and just people have the ability to look back on things, especially with Channing and RJ having media roles and talking about the 2016 title, especially during All-Star, and then LeBron reflecting fondly on the All-Star or the championship era in Cleveland, and then Kyrie kind of reflecting fondly upon it too. All the guys having good things to say about their time together in Cleveland, and then Kevin Love in turn being lifted up helps a lot too.
I think Kyrie is obviously in this discussion. I think Tristan is in this discussion.
Yeah. I think Tristan gets it before Kyrie, though.
Yeah, but I mean in terms of the merits, I think Kyrie would be ahead is the thing. This is
I agree. Yeah. Everyone, if you're a regular listener to this show, you know my stance. 23, 0, and 2 should have been taken out of circulation if any of those players ever left for went to greener pastures or went to a different team, if you're LeBron or Kyrie or eventually maybe Kevin as well. But again, Chris is of the stance, and he's kind of solely of this just flat out retiring a jersey's weird, and honoring the team as well might be a thing. The Cavs could easily hang up a 2016 up in the rafters on a jersey instead to honor the entire 2016 championship squad one day too. They could realistically do that. They retired a microphone for Joe Tate, for God's sake, and they retired just the microphones that I'm thinking of right now. Obviously individual players are important, but let's go back into the Kyrie aspect of this, because I'm dancing around a little bit, but people know my stance. It shouldn't have been put back in circulation, but that's just my stance.
Yeah, and I'm of the mind that like I think you can put honor guys' jerseys, and like I think if you want to take something like 42 in the MLB out of circulation, I think that's different than I just think guys can wear like whatever numbers they want. And I think you can honor the fact that they're
feel that way with 23 with Michael Jordan then, and then possibly like let's say 12 with Tom Brady.
No, because like I think 42 in MLB is Jackie Robinson, 12 in
I know,
Tom Brady.
but.
Yeah.
Those are the greatest players of all time as well.
Yeah, but like here's the thing: there's other sports, like I would say, namely soccer, where it's just like guys rotate through numbers, and it's about the guy, not the number. And like,
certain numbers have certain significance in soccer too, don't they?
Yes, but it's also like there's a weight of like you're the guy who took X number after this guy had it. Like there's I don't believe anyone has worn like 10 since Messi left Barcelona. So like there is like a weight to that you have like you grapple with. I think when someone does get a number, it can mean something. I'm just not like tied up in it. I think I have an interesting question more about this is this. It hasn't happened obviously because he technically like just kind of retired I think, but I wonder if there's a world where like Anderson Varejao gets like his number retired as well, and 17 gets taken out of circulation, and maybe that's before like any like Kevin I think would make a ton of sense pretty soon after he retires. LeBron obviously, Kyrie in theory, like we'll see where that goes. But like it wouldn't shock me if Anderson Varejao is like a sneaky one to slide in here.
Yeah, Justin Rowan, other friend of the pod, hardcore disagrees because we all know my stance on this one too. The Cavs should retire 17 just because Andy does have like the tenure with the Cavs, and I think he is a significant enough figure within the organization to maybe have that type of clout. I mean, let's be frank, the Cavs did him a solid and signed him to like a weird contract at the end of the one last season, but the season prior, just so technically Varejao could qualify to play in the Olympics. So it's the Cavs obviously have a good working relationship with Varejao, and I could see it realistically happening, or maybe, I don't know. I do like the soccer approach, and maybe at the NBA adopting more of a soccer style things in certain aspects. Maybe certain numbers having a certain significance to them. Like you really have to like earn your stripes and prove like, hey, you are worthy of wearing 2 or 0 or 17 or 13. 23 obviously out of the question just because LeBron is just so historically significant to this team that no player can live up to those expectations. But maybe there's a little something to it, but also you run into the issue of the Cavs have won 1 championship. They've made the NBA Finals 5 times as an organization. They can't go about retiring every single number because they're not the Celtics, but they could also run into the same issue as the Celtics where you're seeing some of the oddest numbers in circulation in Boston.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think, like, you remember Kyrie got asked about this. He's just like, it's a number. Like, I kind of think ultimately it's just a number with some of this stuff. Like, 23, I understand there's going to be weight to that, but, like, I don't know. I think Love would be, I think to wrap this up, I think Love would be the odds-on favorite. I just would guess, like, hey, number one, that's a funny thing to say considering like where we were a couple years ago and what the vibes seem to be.
Where we were heading into last season.
Right, but it's just like that would be the one for me that I would almost guess like him or Andy or LeBron would be like my top 3 if I had to guess.
I agree with that, but Tristan Thompson is like a close 4th for whoever's in 3rd.
He like also but is he like something they do immediately? Is there an impetus to do him immediately in the way there might be for Kevin or LeBron?
No. But like he was significant, like one of the most underrated Cavaliers from that era. Yeah. Like, my girlfriend asked me about it the other night because Chloe and Tristan are having another baby. She's like, he wasn't even that big of a deal for the Cavs. We were at dinner. And I just made a face, and she's like, "What?" I'm like, "We don't have enough time for me to unpack how important Tristan Thompson was to those Cavaliers teams."
Yes. Like LeBron wise, like it wouldn't shock me if like maybe like if he doesn't do a comeback tour. Maybe like his last season, if there isn't a pre-announcement. I
was going to say, it wouldn't shock me if they had a jersey retirement and he comes out of retirement because he's so caught up in the moment and he plays for the Cavs again. It's chess, not checkers, baby.
I don't even think that. I just think like, let's just say he's on his last season with the Lakers. We know it's his last season. It's his last game in Cleveland. That would obviously be an insane deal. They retire his jersey that game.
So similar to like a Kobe retirement tour where he gets a standing ovation at every.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that.
Like, and they just.
But I also could see him. It may not be with the Lakers if he sticks to his guns and plays with Bronny. If Bronny does end up with a team, like maybe that's who he ends up with. But
that's like 20 rabbit holes we have to jump through to even consider like that.
I mean, hey, it's going to be sick watching LeBron play with the Memphis Hustle in the G League for one season, and the revenue streams in the G League are going to be absolutely bonkers if that's the case.
Yeah, that's not happening. Okay, after the break, we're going to take another mailbag question, so stay tuned for that. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite betting needs and information. Find all of your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for sports wagering information, from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They have you covered on it all. Head to betonline.net today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. And look, coming up this week, there's a big UFC card this weekend. The Guardians are playing all week. There's NBA futures. Anything you want, you could find. I mean, Evan Mobley is like plus 2,000 for Defensive Player of the Year. Go check that out today. That's BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, question number 2 today in this Locked On Cavs Mega Edition mailbag, a two-parter from J216 in the Discord.
This one's tough.
This is tough. Start, bench, cut. Darius Garland, Cavs era Kyrie Irving, and Mark Price.
You want to go first?
This
is a loaded question.
But here's the thing. This is bloody. This is just like a rude question for Jay just asking us to commit violence on a podcast. I think I go to Mark Price first because the track record for him is obviously longer than Darius Garland.
Mm-hmm.
But didn't take a lot of what the context of this matters. Like, are you playing in today's NBA? Like, what is that? I think honestly. I think Cavs era Kyrie, for the heights he hit, has to be start.
I agree with that, and that's the path I'm on, and that's why I'm kind of dancing around it, because we sing the praises of Darius Garland on this show quite a bit, but I think I'd start Kyrie, have Mark Price come off the bench, and unfortunately cut Darius Garland just because we just have a smaller sample size of what Garland brings to the table. And if you really want to be like a little bit snooty about this contract extension of his, he's only had one truly breakout year where he's had relatively good health, COVID and back injuries notwithstanding, but also just where he truly jumped off the page. You said okay, the Cavs do have their franchise guard, where Price obviously took time to grow, but had that longevity on his side, and Kyrie kind of popped right away, and you're oh, this guy is the guy for the Cavs. So, and then as he continued to ascend, he just became even more fun. Kyrie was so fun. I was drinking Pepsi Max even though I hated it in college. That's how fun he was.
That's just you being duped there, buddy. But Mark Price, 3 All-Star seasons, 91 or 4 All-Star seasons, 3 in a row from ages 27 to 29. In the early 1990s, played 70 games above 70 games in all the seasons, 72, 75, 76, 40 around 48% from the field each of those seasons, close to 40%, including one season up near 42% from 3 on very low volume, to be clear, but was above 3 on those percentages. In 2 of those 3 seasons, Evan, up near just a shade below 95% from the free throw line on about 4 attempts per game, but that's just crazy high free throw percentage. 17, basically a 17-7 guy or an 18-8 guy one year. I think the body of work, you have to give the edge to Price just based on his overall career, because he had the 4 All-Star seasons because of all of that. And just made longer playoff runs than what we've seen from Darius before. But I think if you were to say if we were to ask
Darius
this question,
isn't a playoff run period at this point.
Well, that's my point. If we're asking this in 3 years, I think Darius, I would bet on saying if we're gonna answer this question again in 3 years, I would bet Darius and Price flip. The Kyrie resume with Darius is I don't this is not the kind of basketball stuff I am particularly interested in doing. But I wonder at what point someone is going to write the column or do the radio segments you know what? I think Darius is on track to be the best point guard in Cavs franchise history. And like we're gonna like I'm sure there are like people on Twitter that believe that, but I like wonder when like the takeaway on that begins in Darius's run.
Well, people on Twitter who are probably saying that are probably just younger fans who just started getting into basketball and the Cavs and just haven't really like broken down Mark Price stuff. I think during the pandemic is when I went back and started to appreciate Mark Price's game a lot more and formed that take where if he was in the modern NBA, like he would have feasted like Steph at times too, but also the game in the 80s and 90s.
Let's not say like Steph. That is like I'm sorry.
Like
that's
Steph.
That's in terms
of playmaking and shooting and
okay, but I think comparing
defense.
anyone to Steph is just like let's chill. I just think he would have been very good in the modern NBA. Let's just say
bro.
very good.
He would have been very good, but there's also a huge there's a disparity in just in terms of athleticism and ability between the 80s and 90s hoops and what it is now too. So you have to put that in context too. But I made a face because if somebody made that argument right now, I think you're just a prisoner of the moment. But maybe just depending on how things go for the Cavs, obviously, like a lot of this starts and goes with Darius Garland, but it also depends on what Evan Mobley's growth and trajectory is too. And just what those two accomplish together could cement Garland's legacy as the greatest point guard in Cavs franchise history. But we can't see into the future. We're trying to be optimistic here. Like I feel good about the Cavs' chances long term just because they're locking up their key pieces right away. But also, you don't know what's going to happen. Like a lot of unfortunate things could hit the Cavs, or a lot of good things could hit the Cavs, and that's just kind of where I'm at. We're like, yeah, I could believe it, but I also have to see it first. I'm cautiously optimistic. And long story short, there.
Yeah. So
and also, Isaiah Mobley had a beautiful dime to Ochai Agbaji in the third.
Yeah, he's been fun in summer league. So Mark Price, we're recording this as Evan just kind of like we're recording this during a Cavs summer league game. So there you go, but. To really date what we're doing here. But Mark Price had 22 to 30 with the Cavs. Again, 3 All-Star seasons, and then he has 3 other seasons. One where he played 7 games with Washington, played 70 games, 49 as a starter for the Warriors in 96 and 97. Last year in Orlando at age 33. 63 games played, 33 as a starter for the Magic that season. Had just a really long run with the Cavs that I think aside from the 1 year he plays 16 games is like a very high bar. And at age 30 he only plays 48 games that year and starts 34 due to some injuries and things, but like a very pretty steady run with again 4 All-Star seasons. Garland's a little bit ahead in terms of when he made his first All-Star. That's like if you're going to say okay, where does this go? Like Garland made his first All-Star before at the younger age than Price did. He also came to the league obviously at a younger age. I also just Evan, to kind of round this out, I do just kind of think Kyrie, just because of the shot he hit and then just also some of the stuff he did.
We're not talking about Kyrie enough.
Because he's
so good.
Cavs era Kyrie is just I understand it ends badly and it leaves this bitter taste in your mouth if you're a fan. But there is not a world that I can conceive of that anyone will hit a more important shot in Cavs history than Kyrie Irving.
Yeah, the story is not just the end; it's everything leading up to the end as well, is what I'm going to say. But the shot being the most significant moment before the block, but being the moment that more or less iced the game for the Cavs and won that championship was huge. But it's not just that for me, but when LeBron left Cleveland the first time for Miami, the Cavs were destitute and barren and kind of hopeless. Fans, and myself included, were pining their hopes to Ramon Sessions or Mo Williams or Baron Davis when he came in a trade that involved Mo Williams. And then there's guys like Antoine Jamison you're hoping to be something, but he's not. Or you're studying Samardo Samuel's weight loss or Luke Herringody or just all these other storylines. But then they get this kid from Duke who hardly played. And like I said, he popped right away. And I think he gave the organization something to build off of and hope, and also gave fans who stuck around after LeBron left something to care about too, because before that the Cavs were just SOL and dead in the water. And that's where I think the significance for me really starts. And I think I'm a little biased because I think Kyrie really sparked my love and just of covering this team, and just where my passion and formations for covering this team really started. And just watching him grow in real time and just become more and more of a dynamic player just is so fun. Folks, go back to when he crossed up Brandon Knight in the Rising Stars game. There's just so many, just pinpoint moments throughout Kyrie's time with the Cavaliers before LeBron came back that you're just like, holy cow, this kid is really good. And then when LeBron came back, like, he was the perfect Robin to LeBron's Batman, and they did a lot of crazy good things together over 3 years.
Yeah, the dusting Brandon Knight was one of the most insane things.
I think Chris Webber's commentary, he went, "Oh no," like really loudly. That's also when Brandon Knight has had a very bad month, because I think that's when DeAndre Jordan just ruined his life too, like soon after that.
Yes. All right. We'll take a mailbag question about Caris LeVert after the break. All right. Last mailbag question for part 1. It's about Caris LeVert from Gillig_Alec on Twitter, who writes, "I feel like Caris LeVert has gone under the radar for this team. Isn't he the biggest X factor for the Cavs this year? If he's healthy, he's a dynamic player for us. Is he a healthy dynamic? If he's healthy, he's a dynamic. Is he dynamic? The wording of this is a little bit off, but he's a dynamic player for us or a trade piece? Question mark. So there's a word missing there. But what do you think his future holds for the Cavs? Huge fan of the pod, they write. So, Evan, let's break this up into chunks. We talked about this a little bit
last night with Justin Rowan and a few others.
Well, we also talked about it on the pod last week from what people can access, not our Google chat group. But Evan, let's start with this. Let's unpack this piece by piece. Is he the biggest X factor for the Cavs? I'm gonna say no. I feel pretty strongly about that.
I wouldn't say strongly. I think he could be a variable for the Cavs, not a factor here, obviously. But
I mean,
it depends on the player you're going to get.
Those are kind of the same. A variable and a factor are going to be like the same thing. Like, I mean,
a variable is like a piece you can remove. A factor is like, okay, this guy is like a key component to what you're building and trying to establish. Like when Ricky Rubio went down, he was a factor. When Rajon Rondo came in, he was a variable because you had Darius Garland eventually come back, and he's more of a factor. But when Jared Allen went down, he was a factor. And then you have Ed Davis and Evan Mobley and Moses Brown coming in. Those are variables. That's just how I view it in my mind. But Caris LeVert, if he's healthy and able to contribute, I think that's great. I think that is highly beneficial for the Cavs, and I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt in that regard. But I don't know if he can be an X factor. And just in terms of this question of, like, what does the future hold with him? I firmly believe, like, what the Cavs do with Colin Sexton kind of shapes Caris LeVert's destiny with the Cavs too. Like, if they extend Sexton, at least financially, it feels irresponsible to extend all that money to two shooting guards who largely have a similar skill set, but in different, like, in offensively, but like different packages and things that quirks as well that make them unique in their own ways. But that's just kind of where I'm at. And I have to chew on this a little bit, but I want to hear your thoughts on this. I'm going to bounce it back to you, Straw Man.
Look, I'm in a big juice phase, so you know what? Leave me be. I'm doing healthy things for myself. But I think biggest X factor for me is just strong, because I think, like, the biggest X factors are how big of a step does Evan Mobley take, and are you healthy, and does Darius Garland take another leap? Like, those are much bigger deals to me than, like, what you get from Caris LeVert. I think the part about his future is, I would say, like, is he a dynamic player for you? He could be. He also could be a trade piece just because he's, like, on an $18 million expiring contract. I think you were right, Evan, and we said this last week, is saying, like, I just can't imagine there's a world where, like, he and Colin Sexton both are getting the money I think they're looking for and are both employed and paid by the Cleveland Cavaliers beyond this season, right? Like, that just doesn't seem like a realistic thing. That's just, like, a lot of resources for that kind of grouping. Look, maybe that changes if, like, you know, quarters work out and you want to skew offensively. Like, there's no way it could happen. It just doesn't feel like the likeliest outcome to me.
Yeah.
But I think under the radar probably is right for this, just because, like, they did give up what is gonna. I think if things go correct for them this year, they did give up a first round pick for him, and, like, we could look at that and say, like, was that the best use of the asset at that time? All that stuff. I think in retrospect, how we view that will be kind of an interesting kind of moment as we're kind of analyzing where the Cavs go from here and what they ultimately kind of get and from LeVert over the next, you know, year, a couple months, or whatever it ends up being.
Yeah, it's See, it's tough for me to fully unpack this because, again, I just can't get over the financial aspect of if you're committing money to Colin Sexton, you don't want to do the Caris LeVert, and he becomes a more tradable asset. And because if you're the Cavs, like you said, they gave up a first-round pick for him in essence, especially if they do make the playoffs this year. And maybe you want to recoup something of value back so that you don't completely lose out on a guy that you traded a first-round pick for, because as a team who is building largely through the draft and, just smart moves on the margins that the Cavs have just kind of made under Kobe Altman, you need to be cognizant and mindful of not just what's ahead of you next season or the year after that, with if you lose Caris LeVert as a free agent if you don't trade him, but also just what the years ahead hold as well, because the Cavs might need more draft ammunition if they want to maybe make a bigger or splashier move if something comes available. But that's neither here nor there. But if he's healthy, he's benefit, and if he's comfortable with this team too, because I think there was like a clear disparity of Caris LeVert's familiarity with how the defense functions under Bickerstaff and how the offense kind of works under their couple set rotations and design plays and everything. And at that point, like, you just want him to get comfortable and know the terms and vernacular so that he can kind of make an impact on both ends of the floor. And maybe then you finally get a bit of a glimpse of the kind of player the Cavs are hoping they would get from Indiana last year. And yeah, I think just health is the biggest factor. Like you said, health of Garland and health of this team in general is an X factor. And if we want to consider Caris LeVert a factor in that regard, like, that's where he falls in place. Like, if he's healthy, that's a factor in play for the Cavs, because more body is obviously the better in this case.
Yeah, like I think like his ability to handle some scoring, some of the stuff he does and does well, will help you. Like, they can help you in games. They can help solve some of your issues where the offense can kind of muddle down and stuff. Is it going to like really raise your ceiling as an offense? I would say you're hoping it kind of keeps your offense more steady and helps it kind of remain competent enough more than it does kind of raise your ceiling. What could like really raise your ceiling and push this team above would be like, hey, Evan Mobley just took a big offensive leap in year 2, or like they just had better injury luck. Like I was looking at like if you look at the East and we're at next year with like the Bulls and so like you have the elite teams. I would say like Milwaukee, Miami, Boston, maybe Philly's in there. We'll see. But like you kind of look at these teams that are like 5 through, let's say 9. Toronto, Chicago, the Hawks and the Cavs. The Nets were 7th last year, but like Lord knows what's going on there. I think like whoever is going to end up like 5-6 and avoid the play-in, like it might just be the team that's the healthiest.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think people are saying that the Cavs are like locked in to 6 through 10 for the next couple of years because they're signing Garland and Allen. Like it's people who are Sexton fanatics that I see this from. But you're right though. Or like the Cavs are, I would say, better than Indiana, Brooklyn. I'd say New York, especially if they trade for Donovan Mitchell, not to give up the farm for him. Washington for sure. Charlotte as well, just because I have questions about what they're trying to do, and especially like their coaching hires. Cause like Steve Clifford's a good coach, but I don't know if he's that good.
Or like what is happening with Miles Bridges?
And then there's Orlando and Detroit, obviously as well, who are teams that are trying to be bad. Like those are 7 teams right there that are behind Cleveland right now, in my opinion. So that puts the Cavs at 8. But like you said, if they're healthy, they could climb up the pole a little bit, and they could be 4 or 5. They could be 3 as well, maybe, just depending on how things shake out. Because like we saw what happened with Chicago. Like Chicago is a team where I believe they have the ability to be a very good team, possibly a great team, but a lot of their key players struggle with staying healthy. So like that's a concern in itself. But the Cavs could take advantage of that if they're able to have the luxury of health on their side. But we'll see. We saw the Cavs like be arguably one of the best teams in the league, or not the league, conference record-wise, because they were healthy while the rest of the teams were struggling with COVID, and the Cavs got slapped across the face with COVID and injuries, and we saw them just slowly stumble back down and then into the play-in tournament and then out of the playoffs entirely. So interesting stuff, I would say, but I think there's a path just with those 7 teams I mentioned being worse than Cleveland, and the Cavs could kind of be in the thick of things for the 1 through 8 spots in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, I mean, I think they are clearly below that tier, and to answer the question kind of one last time, I think LeVert is a factor.
Yeah.
I think he is like the biggest X factor in this team. I think that is very clearly not what LeVert is. Okay, we'll be back tomorrow with another Locked On Cavs and mailbag. We're going to talk about the shooting guard position a lot in that question. So some more Caris LeVert talk, as well as Ochai Agbaji, Isaac Okoro, and Colin Sexton in that. So stay tuned for more Locked On Cavs mailbag. Go check out Locked In NBA now for a great second listen today. I'm Chris. That's Evan. Be well. All right, back here on Locked On Cavs. I'm Chris Manning. Today is part 2 of our mailbag, answering some fun questions from you, the listeners, once again. This one's going to dive a little more into some of the shenanigans going on with the Cavs right now, some of the things facing the team going forward. I'll thank you guys for submitting questions as always, and want to thank you, by the way, for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. Remember, we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, we're back. Part 2 of the Locked On Cavs mailbag. Again, we're recording this a little early, so if some context, some of these things have changed. My bad, but had to do this early for reasons. Evan, let's start. We're going to talk a lot today about the shooting guard position. We got a bunch of questions about that, and we got one question that was, I think it's maybe my favorite mailbag question we've ever gotten. So we're going to use that for 2 segments on today's show. But the first question comes from Positive Cavs fan on Twitter, who asked, "What will the Cavs do about the shooting guard position minutes with LeVert, Okoro, Agbaji, and Sexton? And who is most likely to be the starting 2 to begin the season?" That's Dave GT5 on Twitter asked a similar question to this as well when we put out the call for questions. So the latter half of that to me is just like very hard to answer. Now, if I had to guess today, I would probably just guess LeVert. But do I feel good about that guess? No, I do not. I think we need to get to training camp. We need to get to preseason games. We need to kind of see, there's a lot of stuff, guys are in Vegas working out with the team. There's a lot of things we don't see and stuff that we just have to then ask about and training camp stuff that as it happens, when we can answer that question. I think the meat on this question is really about who gets minutes at the 2. And I would just say this. Don't think of this group. Look, you certainly want to have guys on the wing that maybe are fit these roles as they exist, but you're having wings there. They're going to play the 2 and the 3. Markkanen's playing the 3 obviously, but he'll play some 4, and then you're going to play 2 of these guys at one time. You could see LeVert and Okoro as a duo. You could see Okoro and Agbaji as a duo. Sexton and I think Okoro and Agbaji can make some sense in terms of a stylistic fit if you want to go a little smaller on the wing and figure some of that out. I think just the nature of the Cavs roster, Evan, means that these guys are not just limited to playing the 2. They may be their ideal position, and you're trying to find some upgrades to get a guy who's 6'7" instead of one of these guys that fits this sort of parameter. But these guys are not just going to play the 2. They're going to play, I think, in multiple spots just based on how the roster functions right now and who the Cavs actually have to fill minutes.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it does go down to how JB Bickerstaff doesn't necessarily assign 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or just any numerical value to his players. He kind of breaks them down as smalls, bigs, and I think wing players, again, hasn't elaborated much on just how he schematically lays players out. But I did do a poll on the wonderful site that is twitter.com, and over almost 1,100 people voted, and it was a 32-32 tie between Agbaji and Sexton for the starting 2 guard next year.
That feels like what Twitter would tell you too.
Yeah, but I also said, so I also preface with try, even though it's because it's hard to ignore what Abaji's doing during summer league. The game against Charlotte, he was very good, and he has had he had a rough game 2 in summer league against Memphis, but has looked good against Memphis, looked good against Detroit, looked good against Charlotte, and will look good against the 5th team. Preface, we're recording this before we know the 5th team the Cavs are playing, but has looked solid. And I think, and then after that it was LeVert who finished 3rd, and then Okoro who finished 4th. And I think just with how multifaceted and different some of these players are, I think you have to find avenues to play all these guys. And we talked about this with rotation breakdown stuff, but unless your name's Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, because we have to say Evan Mobley because there's 2 Mobleys on the roster now, or Jared Allen, it's probably going to be an open contest for starting spots on this roster, or just spots in this rotation in general. And the battle at the 2 guard position is going to be a very interesting one to watch happen, because you said, Chris Fedor has reported this several times. You and I have heard this too. People have just said this, the assumption is going into next season, like Caris LeVert will be the starting 2 guard. So maybe he's penciled in as the starting 2 guard heading into camp. But I feel like JB Bickerstaff's going to have an open competition between LeVert, Sexton, Okoro, Agbaji, because one, healthy competition is a good thing because it just maximizes the potential of your roster, and also it helps you figure out like guys you may want to be playing over other guys too, maybe guys who are more ready and equipped for what you're looking for in the moment. But at the same time, whoever ends up winning that competition is probably the best ideal fit next to Darius Garland, because you can make an argument for all 4 of those players too, but you're realistically finding the guy that you pair next to Garland to make his life easier, to relieve some of the defensive pressure he faces. And also, if you're being cognizant of it, if like let's see start Okoro, if Agbaji ends up being like a very, very good defender, we haven't got to see much of it during summer league play because the Cavs kind of force him to switch off players quite often. Like they're running a very switch heavy defense in summer league, but he makes sense. LeVert in theory, just as a quote unquote bigger wing who still plays 2-3, makes sense too. And then like Sexton, we know that song and dance, it's not pretty defensively, but like offensively, ideally is Garland's best backcourt partner right now, just in terms of familiarity and offensive thunder and lightning dynamic that they kind of run together. So that's just kind of what you have to factor in and think about. It's an interesting thought exercise, and I think it's just going to be something I'm going to be watching very closely when camp rolls around in like mid to late September.
Yeah, I think the other thing about this that is worth learning is like this is going to, I think, evolve as the season goes on, because number one, the who can play the 2 and the 3 is going to be different with Howell Nato versus what I think they're hoping to have with Ricky Rubio. The 2 guard stuff with Ricky Rubio that really worked last year is going to push these guys to the 3 if they're going to stay on the floor. That's just going to be part of bringing Rubio back. But that's not going to be the case until, like, let's just say January. So there's more minutes for them to suss some of this out the first half there, while Nato, who's a 6'1 guard, who I don't think you're going to play a lot of 2-guard stuff with, is an option. So, like, I think this answer is just going to change as we go on, and you're going to see probably some riding of hot hands. You're going to see, I would expect, part of the early feeling out process will be seeing what pairings work and what doesn't. Like, does LeVert work well with one guy versus the other? Does Agbaji work well with another? Again, this just assumes Colin Sexton is back. Like, if he's not back and they go a different way with that, then this changes this question, and this is maybe less of a crunch for minutes at the spot. But if he's back, you're then figuring some stuff out, and then I think you're trying to figure out what that manages, and maybe that means like he has to play someone and Neto gets pushed out of the rotation a little bit. Like, there's just a lot of stuff that, as we're looking about this, that feels sort of like a very just like let's throw darts at a dartboard and let's see what sticks, and then like it's gonna change as we go on. And again, I really, really believe when we're answering this question, Rubio's return and how that is managed will have that is just going to shape minutes at the 2 in a large way, I think. Okay, let's go to break.
Well, one last point.
Yeah.
I think people who are maybe wringing their hands based on reports out there that Agbaji may not crack this rotation entirely, that just feels a little premature just because it's July and you can't take much stock in summer league play. I think we'll have a clear idea when preseason rolls around. That's just the only thing I want to preface, is like when we include him in this conversation and whatnot. But I think it's just going to honestly be an open competition. Like you said, the Neto factor is a thing too, the Rubio factor. Like the 3 guards, the 3 position is going to be interesting as well. Like if Cedi Osman is here for training camp, that's interesting. Like, is he even going to be in the rotation, or is he going to have to play just because the Cavs are so barren at depth at that spot? Like, there's a lot of different factors at play, and a lot of it does start and end on who is starting and playing at the 2 for the Cavs.
Yeah, and look, the other part about this that I think it's worth understanding about Agbaji is, like, if he's playing kind of how he is in Summer League, that guy is pushing for minutes, and that will that guy provides something they desperately need. He
provides shooting on the perimeter and also just at the wing position, which is something the Cavs have sorely lacked for quite a bit now.
Yes. All right. After the break, we're gonna start talking about, again, what I think is the best mailbag question we've ever gotten, and we'll dive into this. Okay. Right after this. Today's episode is brought to you by Built Bar. If you haven't tried Built Bar Puffs yet, you're depriving yourself of one of life's greatest joys. And guess what? There's a new flavor. Ready? It's delicious, indulgent cookie dough covered in chocolate. That's right. Built has done it again. Let me introduce you to your new favorite. That's the cookie dough chunk puffs. They have a light and chewy texture, real cookie dough chunks, and of course, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. They're only 160 calories with a whopping 15 grams of protein in them. Run to Built.com to snag a box for you and the family. It will be the perfect treat. They sent us some, can verify that they're excellent, and you can find them in a hiding place in your house if you just want to hoard them for yourself if you're that kind of person. Like all Built bars, the new cookie dough chunk Built Puff is covered in 100% real chocolate. That means they're healthy and tasty. Chocolate covered cookie dough with a light, fluffy texture. They're excellent. And what's great about Built is that all of their bars are made with collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently and provides tons of health benefits. Eat something that tastes good and is good for you. So go to Built.com, use the promo code LOCK15, and get 50% off your order for the cookie dough chunk puff or any of their other amazing Built bars for a workout, for a late night treat, or just a quick protein snack. Again, the promo code is LOCK15 for 15% off your order at Built.com. Grab yourself a Built bar. All right, question here today is from @It's815 on Twitter, who asks, besides Evan Mobley, what player on the Cavs roster would push this team to new height if they made a massive leap next year from what they were last year? So Evan Mobley, I think taking Evan Mobley off of this, and then I think what we're going to do in segment 3, Evan, is we're going to talk about what a Mobley leap could provide, because I think it is part of this discussion. So that'll be in segment 3. We're going to dive into, let's insert Evan Mobley back into this and see what that, and kind of see where, that could take us into, the multiverse of Cavs stuff. I think this question's hard to answer because, Darius Garland
that was who I thought of.
Darius Garland just took a really massive leap. I don't think you're getting a massive leap from Kevin Love. I don't think you're getting a massive leap from Larry Markkinen. Jared Allen kind of took an underrated leap last year. I think you're more hoping that some of the
I'm not when we say massive leap, I envision what Garland did.
Yeah, but let me finish. The Jared Allen thing is you're hoping that stays consistent. You're hoping that is the case. Caris LeVert is what he is at this point. So I think this leads me to two guys. And there will be massive in different ways. And they are Isaac Okoro and Colin Sexton. Those are my two answers to this.
My two answers are Darius Garland and Isaac Okoro, because Garland hit a new high that none of us saw coming, and this is just going to be the crux of my argument. Does he have fuel in the tank to sustain that level of play and then hit another level on top of that? Because the Cavs clearly invested in him and believe in him as their franchise guard. And I think he's more than shown it in this one season that he had, this in his third leap breakout year. But can he sustain that level of play? And then obviously, you want to build upon that, become more efficient, become more impactful in terms of playmaking, limit your turnovers, stay healthy. I think that's a key thing too. There's so many things that Garland could do to make an impact. Maybe he has more of a Jared Allen leap, where it's not super nuclear ascension, but you see him hit a fifth or sixth gear that you maybe didn't expect him to have in him right away. And that just kind of changes the entire formula and changes what we perceive Darius Garland can or cannot be. That's who I'm thinking of. Let's talk about Okoro though. So,
well, I think the Garland point is fair. I wonder how my question I guess would be how much does that leap truly change the trajectory? Is it just is that going to push them up? That's I guess my question there. The Okoro thing I think is just I think he's just a good defender, and he's below average on offense. But if he just goes from below average on offense to hey, this guy's not getting socially distanced from when he's standing in the corner, and is comfortable shooting threes, and he's attacking closeouts as teams start rotating towards him and stuff, and some of the midi playmaking stuff we've seen from him in very small spurts happens. He makes plays in transition. If just that dial gets turned enough where you're just this guy is playable and his defense remains good. And that guy's just a competent wing player for you. That's just such a glaring hole in this roster that I'm just we may not attribute a bunch of the Cavs' success to him directly. It will just make them so much more solid and have less weaknesses to worry about as they get into basketball that matters in theory, April and stuff. If he's just a dude, that just really kind of makes your roster make a lot more sense if that just happens.
Well, it definitely makes them more fully functional on both ends of the floor because, like you said, Okoro is their best perimeter defender. I think he has the ability to defend 1 through 4 at this point. And like he has shown you a couple things in offense where like there's moments where you see it all click for Isaac. You're like, okay, yeah, I can see how he functions, where if he tightens up his hand a little bit more, like, yeah, that's going to be the next aspect of his game. But he serves as a cutter. There's times where like he's not the most confident 3-point shooter, but like it's not a complete liability in his game. But there's times where you see those flashes, but you've yet to see him kind of put all those pieces together. And to be fair, he did enter the league in unprecedented circumstances. He entered during COVID NBA bubble situation where everything was just different and odd, and player development doesn't really exist in those situations because coaches can't get close to players and players really can't get close to other players. Like, yeah, they're doing like 5-on-5 drills and stuff, but like they're still trying to maintain safety during the peak of the pandemics. But I have said this before, and I'll say it again. Like, this is probably going to be the make or break season for Isaac. Like, I'm trying to figure out how I'll ask this during media day so it just doesn't get shut down with like Kobe laughing at it or something. But I'm like, or even JB, we're like, oh, we think Isaac's great the way he is. But like, what do you need from him as a player to round out and complete this rotation? Because it's true. Teams will disrespect him on the perimeter, where they will have defenders sag off him and then form a wall to frustrate Evan Mobley and Jared Allen, and also make life harder for Colin Sexton or Caris LeVert as cutters or slashers, and then also harder for Darius Garland just to try and drive in the lane and maybe kick out to a guy on the perimeter. If that guy on the perimeter is Okoro, you don't feel confident that that's going in. So Okoro is really just like a factor where if he shows that, like, hey, I am average to slightly above average offensively, where like I know what my role is. Like, I think he knows what his role is. He is learning how to play off ball. He said that like that's a hard part of his second season in the league, is learning how to play mostly off ball at this point. But having him cut along the baseline was obviously like a bread and butter play that has worked for the Cavs with him. I think maybe him becoming a more reliable shooter is something that could definitely help him, but also the handle stuff. Like, I think point Okoro is a fallacy. Like, I don't think that's ever going to work.
No.
But if you had him act as like a secondary creator or a secondary shot creator for everybody else in the offense, where like he can drive to the basket and kick out to somebody, or he can run functional pick and rolls with Evan Mobley and Jared Allen or Kevin Love and Larry Markkinen and pop scenarios instead, like that bolsters things for the Cavs and really changes the dichotomy of things offensively too. And also just for him as a player personally, that changes his financial futures as well too, because teams might, and Cleveland included, might warm up to paying him more of the money that he might think he's worth versus what kind of how everyone feels about him now, because like you said, he's below average offensively, and there's moments it clicks, but it's so few and far between that you really can't say like, okay, these are the 3-4 things Isaac Okoro is very good at offensively that he has in his bag of tricks that he can lean on a night-to-night basis.
Before we go to break and switch to Evan Mobley, my case for Colin Sexton in this is just,
lay it on me, King.
If he comes in next year and like his game is shifted in a way that kind of accentuates what worked last year, and it's not Colin trying to fully imprint himself on that, and like you see him bombing threes at a higher clip, and maybe there's more effort on defense and he cuts more, and like that, and these specific parts of his game get turned up, and then some of the stuff that makes him honestly really interesting, but is also like kind of where the fit questions I think come from, as much as the size question comes into it.
Yeah,
that could be such a useful player, and it's like the argument for like him being more useful to them to Caris LeVert next year. I don't know how likely it is. Like, some of this is just like I have no film or data or anything from last year that really tells me how to feel about this one way or the other. That is just I kind of where I go to it, and I'm just like, maybe that's our answer, and it's staring us in the face. If you get a leap out of Colin Sexton that allows him to kind of accentuate what worked, and you can cover for him because you have this defensive infrastructure, and it'll take time to figure out. But like there's a path to me where that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Do the Cavs believe that's the case? Is that how he wants to play? Like, there's a lot of like things that will impact that answer, but that's it. All right, let's go to break.
Well, just one more thing to your Sexton point. I think it's easier for the Cavs to get him more acclimated to how they do things offensively, because Cleveland has had a full 84 games this season of what they're trying to build, and I think the on-court chemistry between Garland, Mobley, and Allen helps a lot, and then figuring in these plug-and-play pieces like Sexton probably makes it a little bit easier. Maybe you don't see like as dramatic of a drop-off as you did in those 11 games Sexton played last year. Like, I think he's going to be interesting. If it depends if he's back or not. That's just because I assume he will be, but until he is, like, I can't firmly say, like, yeah, he's going to be the dude who can take a leap.
What does he want?
Yeah, and that's the other thing. What does he want? Like, he has a very defined play style, and people crucify me for him, like, shooting more like Gary Trent Jr., but not even that. Just maybe, like, if he takes 4 or 5 3-pointers a game, it's going to make his life so much easier on offense. It also make the Cavs' life so much easier on offense because Colin's a very good shooter, and I wish he would lean more on that instead of kind of what he knows and just driving to the basket and getting that just bit of the blinders and tunnel vision he has.
Yeah, all right. After the break, let's talk about Evan Mobley and what a leap for him could mean for the Cleveland Cavaliers. All right, last segment on Locked On Cavs, last segment of this two-parter mailbag. Thanks to everyone who sent in some excellent questions. Thank you, Mobley,
Chris, for coordinating it.
I mean, this is what I do, is I need to have sheets of questions in front of me so my brain can function. Evan Mobley is very clearly the answer to this if we were going to give the whole roster of, like, who takes the biggest leap?
Oh,
and,
yeah.
like, this is the dude that will drive them. And I think specifically, like, it's an offensive leap. If Evan Mobley takes some kind of notable offensive leap, creation-wise, scoring-wise, shooting-wise, like, 1 or 2 of those, like, I think not to be greedy, but, like, you know, some of these other things, like, I don't know what it'll be. We'll see kind of what he says he's worked on and what the focus is and what the team is looking for from that. But, like, if Evan Mobley goes from being kind of like he was a very good defensive player last year and a very impactful player as a result. The offense was come and go a little bit. There were some really good. There were some really bad. Times we were like, oh, like, he can actually post up better than I thought. There's times we got stonewalled and didn't have any moves in the post. There's, like, a lot of give and take there. If Evan Mobley takes a massive offensive leap and you're just like, oh my God, this guy is providing us a ton on offense in addition to his defense, like, that guy can make your team ceiling a lot higher, I think.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And if there's guys you hope maybe he's studying, like, who are elite prospects but were kind of raw and flawed offensively, like, maybe if he bulks up a bit more, like, he studies guys like Giannis, who learns how to play with physicality and play through contact, and just kind of, like, when you said he got stonewalled, but learn how to, like, push back on that a little bit. And I think obviously the grind of an 82-plus game season has certainly opened his eyes to what he needs to change, and just in terms of his diet and just weight training and everything else. But maybe because we talk about how he could be a three-point shooter, if you look at his brother, who is a three-point shooter at this point in college and at times during summer league, but Evan Mobley could be a big who stretches it out eventually, but I don't think that needs to be the primary focus of his game. And if they just rely on him as an offensive hub in terms of playmaking, great. I think that's a wonderful idea. I think you need to get more creative with your looks using it as an offensive hub, but that's also more on the coaching staff than me just banging my fist at the desk. But if he studies a little bit of, like, that's just that Giannis tape a little bit, just to kind of figure out, like, hey, how can I handle physicality in this league? How can I use my strength and God-given abilities to get to the basket with explosion and force? And at the same time, because if he's able to kind of just create so much overwhelming rim pressure, it's going to open up so much space on the rest of the floor for his teammates who, like, let's say Okoro hopefully has that leap shooting wise. Like, he's a factor. Darius Garland's a factor. Colin Sexton's floating out there. Ochai Agbaji, in theory, but he's probably going to need time to adjust, will benefit from this. Jared Allen, if he's, let's say Mobley's getting double teamed at the elbow or something like that, like, Jared Allen can benefit from this too, because he'll have more of a clear landing space in the paint as well. Like, there's different ways that Mobley can do this. And I think it's just him learning how to play more physically and also just bulking up. Like, he was very small for his position, how the Cavs utilized him. And that's just kind of what we both agreed on towards the end of the season, is, like, he needs to bulk up a little bit just to handle the rigors and physicality of the position and kind of what the Cavs are asking him to do right now offensively.
Yeah, I would say if we're looking at 2 areas on the floor where I'm curious to see what he looks like in year 2. Number one, around and then a little bit outside of the elbows. They ran a fair amount of stuff last year with him where he'd fake a DHO and he'd either drive or create or look to pass. Like, does he make different reads out of that? Does he Is he more effective just kind of bullying to the rim in those situations? Does he have a pull jumper in those situations? I think that's something you'll see because it allows you to use Garland in a certain way. It allows you to use, that's maybe a place where he could develop some chemistry with Abaji. That's a place where he could develop some chemistry with Sexton. Like, there's a lot you could do with that. That I think leads him to having the ball in his hands and creating and making plays out of stuff. I think especially if you're going to play him at the 5, there's some really interesting lineups you could put together where it's like him and like a bunch of shooters. And like, I just think that could be like really, really good offensive for the Cavs, and you bank on him being your defensive anchor in the situation. I think that's like a fair gamble to make if it's like him and Love and let's say Abaji and Rubio and Sexton. Let's just take those 5, just throwing them out there. There's so much you could do with that I think could make a ton of sense if you lean into some of his DHOs, the decision-making aspect of his game, and letting him do that stuff. The other part I would say is on the post-ups they'll do with him are not like throw him the ball at the block and like let him just bang. It is like a little bit stretched out. It's on the baseline. He will sometimes take that baseline jumper, but does that get extended out a little bit? Does that become like a corner 3? Does that become a place where there's creation that comes out of that? Because it's a lot of right now, like, it feels like when you watch him, he is so long and has good instincts and is skilled enough already where like he can drive into guys that are not like, this isn't going to happen against like Giannis or like the best defenders in the world in a playoff series, but on like a night-to-night basis, he has shown an ability against some centers and some bigs to drive into them, and his size and his length and his feel and his footwork allows him to get off shots, and he makes shots, and it's just like, I don't know what you do with that. He's just an alien, all that stuff. But if it hits a level where he's like hitting a pull-up jumper, or it's like there's a little more bulk to it, whatever those 2 spots to me, if those evolve in a notable way, and like that leads to passing or whatever, like, that's a dude that's just going to raise your offensive floor from being like kind of a offensive team to like maybe not like great, but like I think above average could be realistic.
I think that's realistic too, and I want to ask you this as we kind of close up shop for this fun mailbag mega episode we did, but broke up the 2 parts, Avi. But are you expecting this shot of his to kind of come to fruition early into his sophomore season, or do you think it's going to be more of like a long-term project of something you're observing, maybe something he's working on? Because I think realistically, like, you hear a lot of big guys say it, like I know Tristan Thompson said it tongue-in-cheek, but a lot of big guys say it like this is a league where big men are able to gravitate out to the perimeter and they aren't a liability out there, because a traditional back-to-the-basket big who crashes the glass and rebounds doesn't work. I mean, you see Andre Drummond try to do it with the Cavs for a while because I think he realized, like, hey, I'm a dinosaur in terms of what a player is. How can I maximize my opportunities? Like, do you think Mobley will try to like add this to his game right away, or do you think there's other aspects of his game he needs to focus on first, but like slowly but surely start to expand his range? So maybe like entering year 3, we're saying like, okay, maybe this is the year that Mobley starts to really drift out towards the perimeter, and like, or he's like a trailer in fast break scenarios where like Garland like crashes into like Sexton sprinting on the fast break and kicks it out to Mobley as a trailer. Like, do you think that's more realistic, or do you think it's going to be more immediate?
I would say if we're looking at next year, it is, let's see how he handles the situations where he does get the ball on the perimeter. Does he take a pull-up? Okay. Does he, like, what does he do in those situations? And like, is there like a clear catch and shoot opportunity where we see him fire? I don't think like he's ever necessarily going to be a dude who's like self-creation through stuff, but I think trailer is also a good spot to hit on that, because like, I kind of think like this is never going to be ideal. And like, if he's the 5, just have him run to the rim and like catch a lob, and that's fine. But if it's him and Allen, like him as a trailer could open up some stuff on the fast break. It can make you more dangerous if a team is able to cut off Allen on the fast break, or if like Okoro or Abaji are kind of going down the sidelines and they get cut off, right? Like if a team defends that well and like he's your trailer and they lose track of him, like that's an area where you could see it. I'm curious to see, Evan, how if there's opportunities where it's like very clear he could take a 3 and like, hey, the ball flowed this way to me kind of way, where like it's swinging my way. We ran our initial stuff, but now we're just kind of figuring out what's going on here. Or if a trailing situation, if he takes them then, and if that's a point. And this is, again, something I would like to ask, because if we go back to the beginning of the offseason, the first training clip we saw of him was taking a pull-up, like a 3 as the spacer on a pick and roll where a guy was diving to the rim. Now, certainly, we could look at the Cavs roster and say, huh, this seems like it's on purpose because you have a guy who's not going to shoot threes for you, who's not the playmaker you are, who's going to roll to the rim and dunk.
Okay, I see what you're talking about now. Okay, I was trying to think of who is the ball handler.
There's a certain guy with an afro who was an all-star last year who rolls to the rim and dunks really well, who you want to space off of. And if you're working on that, that feels intentional to me. In
theory also, it's not tenable in the modern NBA to have two bigs that are completely bound to the paint either. If you want to start 2 7-footers, one of them has to get comfortable floating. Or three. Or 3, I guess that's true as well. But, like, one is already a streaky enough shooter. But, like, one guy has the potential to be one, and I just don't think Jared Allen has it in his game, even though Allen has also joked that bigs are taking more threes today, and he needs to add that more to his skill set as well. But
Allen post-ups now, and, like, that's enough for me. It's like he did his part. I think even the way I'll frame this is Jared Allen did his part by adding the post-up stuff into his game and the little bit of creation stuff out of those post-ups. He added the little...
Maybe adding Robin Lopez, this is the X factor, where he can be in Mobley and Allen's ear, like, listen, here's how you become a threat, where it's not Splash Mountain like my brother, but it's a step below that, a Splash Matterhorn, which is much bigger than a mountain. But either way, I'm just thinking of rides at Disney.
It's like the Mine Train and not like a splash. It's like
I don't know. They're rebranding all the rides. The Guardians of the Galaxy ride at Epcot. Let's just call it that.
Yeah. I don't know. I'll be curious. I guess, Evan, is there if you were gonna tell me Evan Mobley, if you got to, like, I just want to end in this. If you got to pick one way he improves and just you got to see what that offered the Cavs, would you pick him being kind of more functional as, like, a creator out of those situations where it's like DHOs and stuff, or is it the shooting? If you could pick one.
Creation out of DHOs and shooting, because I think...
No, I'm saying which one? Which one? You get to pick one. So you get to pick like he's, like, better passing, better self-creation out of DHOs and stuff.
I think the passing, the self-creation would do more for the Cavs, especially with how they maybe want to function. And you saw it at times with him, like, try to be, like, the initiator at the top of the key with Allen, like, crashing or diving to the basket. Like, if you get him a little more comfortable doing that, because I think Mobley does have the vision and skill set, I think that's something that's more tangible for next season. But if the shooting becomes a thing, I'm all on board on it. But I'm going to be a little skeptical until I see him looking more comfortable. Like you said, like, that's going to be like an early observation point where, like, if Evan Mobley's just on the perimeter, like, the ball floats to him on the perimeter, does he take that shot, or does he pass it to somebody else, or does he try to drive to the basket or something?
Yeah. I'll put it this way for me. I don't think him having to shoot and, like, make threes at, like, an average clip even is a prerequisite for him to be great on offense. I think the creation is going to be a prerequisite for him to be great on offense.
I think that's fair. I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Folks, what do you think in the comments below? Let us know. And if you are watching us on YouTube, there's probably a good chance you're not subscribed, so make sure you're subscribed before you close out of this episode as well.
Yeah, please do. We'll be back Wednesday or Thursday of this week, probably maybe with the latest on Colin Sexton. The day we recorded this two-parter mailbag that you're listening to part 2 of, the DeAndre Ayton thing happened, and maybe that'll loosen up the market a little bit. But we will see. Look, Evan, I don't know. DeAndre Ayton got a lot of money.
It's going to be Kevin. Also, probably first one to fall. Who knows?
Yeah. All right. Well, everyone, be well. Check out Locked On NBA. Check out Locked On Suns. Check out Locked On Pacers.
Check out Caitlin Cooper's latest on DeAndre Ayton's fit with the Pacers. It was really good.
It was very good. Caitlin's great. Until next time, I'm Chris. That's Evan. Be well.